The Crusader state of the Kingdom of Jerusalem, created in 1099, was divided into a number of smaller seigneuries. Introduction. According to the 13th-century jurist John of Ibelin, the four highest barons in the kingdom proper were the Count of Jaffa and Ascalon, the Prince of Galilee, the Lord of Sidon, the Lord of Ultra-Jordan. This fourfold division, which did not cover a number of lordships, may be an artificial creation of the 13th century, as the power of various barons fluctuated enormously during the height of the kingdom in the 12th century. There were also a number of independent seigneuries, and some land held under direct royal control, such as Jerusalem itself, Acre and Tyre. Sidon appears to have been rather small, whereas Galilee covered a disproportionate number of sub-vassals, and Sidon was located between Galilee's holdings. Northern states. Aside from the Kingdom of Jerusalem, there were also three other major Crusader states on the mainland: the County of Edessa, the County of Tripoli, the Principality of Antioch. These states nominally bore some dependency on the Kingdom of Jerusalem. The King of Jerusalem was bound to reconcile them in case of disputes, or between a vassal prince and the Latin Patriarch of Antioch, and could claim the regency in case of a vacancy or minority in the successions. Edessa was perhaps the most closely tied to the kingdom, despite its distance. Its first two counts became kings of Jerusalem, and the county was bestowed as a royal gift on Joselini. The county of Tripoli, the nearest of them, is sometimes considered to have been a vassal lordship under the king's suzerainty, although it preserved an extraordinary degree of sovereignty. Antioch was almost independent, for it was founded already before the kingship, and its first holder was a rival of kings, the original leader of the crusade. Later in its history, it would at times recognize Byzantine or Armenian suzerainty, or none at all. These states dated their documents by the reigns of their own rulers, carried out their own foreign policy, and sent military aid to the kingdom of their own will, rather than through feudal obligation. Therefore, they are generally recognized as sovereign and are treated more fully under their own articles. Inheritance in the Kingdom of Jerusalem. Lordships in the Kingdom of Jerusalem were usually hereditary in principle, but in practice the circumstances were such that the holders did not form long uninterrupted lines of inheritance, which was contrary to the usual patterns of succession in Europe. Firstly, in the early years of the kingdom, lords had their own territories, and lordships changed hands often. Secondly, the average lifespan of male lords in Palestine was rather low, due to the constant state of warfare and violence, which led to inheritances by females and/or extinction of whole families. Succession from father to son happened more rarely than in more peaceful countries in Europe. Female succession opened up the option for the liege or the monarch to reward services, loyalty and capability, as well as achievements, by giving an heiress hand in marriage and her inherited lordship to a new man. A typical succession pattern was a father followed by a daughter, sister, or niece, who was then married to a man worthy of some reward, who then himself succeeded to the territory. This made the succession unpredictable and caused the family holding a particular territory to change once or perhaps even more often in a generation. Sometimes families became extinct, or escaped from Syria, and either a distant relative came to claim the land, or more usually, the liege gave the lordship to another family. Sometimes a lord was condemned for treason, rebellion or some other reason, and he and possibly his descendants were disinherited from the lordship. Occasionally, vacant lordships were put into the royal domain, but more often, another person received the lordship. A less careful observer may think that they were not hereditary, but almost always the succession took place according to feudal rights of inheritance, utilizing the relatively high number of heiresses. Many of these seigneuries ceased to exist after the loss of Jerusalem in 1187, and the rest of them after the fall of Acre in 1291. Yet they often had Cypriot European claimants for decades or centuries afterwards. These claimants, of course, held no actual territory in Syria after the mainland kingdom was lost. County of Jaffa and Ascalon. Jaffa on the Mediterranean coast was fortified after the First Crusade, and was a separate county until the revolt of Hugh II of La Pucette in 1134. Afterwards, it was usually held directly by the royal family of one of the relatives. After 1153 it was the double county of Jaffa and Ascalon. When the Egyptian fortress of Ascalon was conquered, it passed in and out of direct royal control, and became titular after the fall of Acre in 1291. A number of seigneuries were vassals to the Count of Jaffa. Lordship of Ramla, originally held by the Bishop of Ramla Lida. In 1126 Ramla became part of Jaffa, and a separate lordship was created after Hugh II's revolt in 1134. The Castle of Adeline happened to be located quite near Ramla. It was later a part of the Adeline possessions, inherited from Helvices of Ramla, daughter of Baldwin of Ramla and wife of Barizon of Adeline. Lordship of Adeline. The Lordship of Adeline was also created out of Jaffa. The lordship was given as a reward to Barizon of Adeline, whose wife Helvices of Ramla already owned lands in the vicinity. The Castle of Ramla, the family's other inheritance, was nearby, and together these territories formed a wealthy entity. Lord Balian of Adeline married Maria Comnena, widow of King Amalric I, and the Adelines became the most powerful noble family of the kingdom, later ruling also over Beirut. Lordship of Mirabel. Mirabel was separated from Jaffa after the revolt in 1134, and also given to Barizon of Adeline, although it was separate from Adeline. Principality of Galilee. The Principality of Galilee was established by Tancred in 1099. The principality became the fief of the families of Saint Omer, Montfort, and then Buez, and its main seat was in Tiberias. Thus it was sometimes also called the Principality of Iberias or the Tiberiad. The principality was destroyed by Saladin in 1187, although the title was used by relatives and younger sons of the kings of Cyprus afterwards. The principality also had its own vassals, the Lordships of Beirut, Nazareth and Haifa, which often had their own sub-vassals. Lordship of Beirut. Beirut was captured in 1110 and given to Fulk of Guiens. It was one of the longest-lived seigneuries, surviving until the final collapse of the kingdom in 1291, although only as a tiny strip on the Mediterranean coast surrounding Beirut. It was important for trade with Europe, and had its own vassals within the Principality of Galilee. The lords of Beirut were Fulks de Guiens (1110–1125), Walter of Brisbane (1125–1138), Guy I of Brisbane (1138–1156), Walter II of Brisbane (1156–1179), Walter III of Brisbane (1179–1187). John I of Iboline (1204–1236), Balian of Iboline (1236–1247), Hugh of Iboline (1247–1254), John II of Iboline (1254–1264), Isabella of Iboline (1264–1282, 1265–1267), Hugh II of Cyprus (1272–1273), Hamo Letrange (1276–1277), Nicholas Lalmin (1278–1282), Guillaume Burlet Aschivdi Bolan 1282-1291-1282-1284 Humphrey of Montfort 1291 Guy of Cyprus. The sub-vassals of Beirut were Lordship of Banias. Banias was given to Baldwin II by the assassins in 1128. Banias was merged with Tehran under Humphrey II of Tehran until it fell to Anwar ad-Din Zangi in 1164, and when it was recovered it became part of the seigneury of Jocelyn III of Edessa. Lordship of Tehran. The Castle of Tehran was built by Hugh of St. Omer to help capture Tyre, and was given to Humphrey I in 1107. The lords of Tehran tended to be very influential in the kingdom. Humphrey II was Constable of Jerusalem, as was Humphrey III. Humphrey IV was married to Isabella, Amalric I's daughter. Tehran was later merged with the royal domain of Tyre. Tehran had two vassals of its own, the Lordship of Castelnarf, which fell to Anwar ad-Din in 1167, and the Lordship of Tehran Armud, which was sold to the Teutonic Knights in 1261. Lordship of Nazareth. Nazareth was the original site of the Latin Patriarch, established by Tancred. It was created as a seigneury in Galilee in 1115. Lordship of Haifa. Haifa was partly an ecclesiastical domain ruled by the Archbishop of Nazareth, and partly created from other lands in the Principality of Galilee. Lordship of Sidon. Sidon was captured in 1110 and given to Eustace I Grenier. Lordship of Caesarea. Caesarea was captured in 1101 and given to the Archbishop of Caesarea. Odo Arpin of Bourges may have been First Lord, but the true First Lord was probably Eustace I Grenier. Lords of Chiarea were Eustace Grenier, Walter I Grenier, Hugh Grenier, Guy Grenier, Walter II Grenier, Juliana Grenier Aimard Alaron, Walter III, John, Margaret John Aylman, Nicholas Aylman, Thomas Aylman, John of Nevils, John Gorap. Lordship of the Shuff. The Shuff was created out of the Lordship of Sidon as a sub-vassal around 1170. It was centered on the Cave of Tyrone. Julian of Sidon sold it to the Teutonic Knights in 1256. Lordship of El Tre-Jourdain. The Lordship of El Tre-Jourdain, consisting of land with an undefined boundary to the east of the Jordan River, was one of the largest and most important seigneuries. It was an important source of revenue from the Muslim caravan route that existed there. The last lord, Raynald of Chatillon, received El Tre-Jourdain by marrying its heiress, Stephanie of Milly. Raynald considered himself Prince of El Tre-Jourdain, not subject to the king, and was especially hostile to the Muslims. He was largely responsible as the pretense for Saladin's invasion of the kingdom in 1187. Saladin conquered much of the area in 1187 and personally executed Raynald at the Battle of Hattin. Other seigneuries and Principality of Bethlehem. Balian of Ibolan, also titular Prince of Galilee. Lordship of Adeline. This lordship seems to have been created after the center of the kingdom was moved to Acre, and held some influence under Frederick II, Holy Roman Emperor. Adam, Agnes, Daniel of Terramond, Daniel II of Terramond, Peter, Jordan. Lordship of Arsuf. Arsuf, located north of Jaffa, was captured in 1101 but remained a royal domain until around 1163 when John of Arsuf became lord. John of Arsuf, the area of Orgines, Melisend with John of Ibolan. John of Ibolan, Balian of Ibolan, John of Ibolan, Balian of Ibolan, Philip of Ibolan. Lordship of Bethsan. Bethsan was occupied by Tancred in 1099. It was never part of Galilee, despite its location, but became a royal domain in 1101, probably until around 1120. It occasionally passed back under royal control until new lords were created. Adam of Bethune, Adam II, John, Guemond, Hugh of Giblet, Walter, Adam III, Guerman II, Baldwin, Walter, Thibaut. Lordship of Blanchegard. Blanchegard was built by King Fulk in 1142, as part of the royal domain, and administered by royal castellans. It became a lordship in 1166, when it was given to Walter I Brisbane, who had been forced to give up Beirut. Walter I Brisbane, Giles, Raoul, Amalric Barley. Lordship of Caemont. Caemont was created after the Third Crusade for Balian of Ibolin, who had lost his other territories to Saladin. It eventually passed into the royal domain. Lordship of Dera. Little is known about Dera, except that it was created in 1118. Lordship of Hebron. Hebron was one of the earliest seigneuries created. Hebron had been under royal control at various times before 1149. It had its own sub-vassal, the Lordship of Beth-Jibolin, created by Fulk in 1149. Soon afterwards Hebron became a royal domain and Beth-Jibolin passed to the Hospitallers. Gerard of Avenay, Galdemar Carpanel, Roger of Haifa, royal domain. Hugh I of St. Abraham, royal domain. Walter Mahomet, royal domain. Baldwin of St. Abraham. Hugh II of St. Abraham. Lordship of Montgizard. Montgizard was built as a defense against Nur ad-Din Zangi, and was the site of a battle against Saladin in 1177. William, John, Aymard, Reginald, William, Robert, Henry, Balian, William, Baldwin, Robert, John, James. Lordship of Nablus. Nablus was first captured by King Baldwin I, and later seems to have been created as a separate lordship out of part of Ultra-Jordan. It was lost during Saladin's conquest of the kingdom. Pagan the Butler. Guy of Milly. Philip of Milly. Queen Maria Comnena received the lordship as her dower from her first husband King Amalric I Balian of Ibolin, Maria's second husband, Stephanie of Ibolin. Nablus was technically part of the royal domain, and also had a royal viscount, who governed in place of the monarch, Ulric. Baldwin Bubulus. Baldwin, son of Ulric. Amalric. Lordship of Scandalian. Scandalian was built in 1116 as a royal domain. It became a lordship by 1148 when Guy of Scandalian was created lord. Guy of Scandalion. Peter, Raymond, William of Mandalay, Raymond, Philip, Humphrey, Esquiva. Lordship of Tyre. Conrad of Montferrat practically created this lordship during the Third Crusade by defending it, as it was the only remaining town of the kingdom. Tyre, always an important town, had been part of the royal domain, and after Conrad, it also belonged to the kings personally. After the kingdom moved to Acre, coronations took place in Tyre. Sometime after 1246, Tyre was conferred upon Philip of Montfort by Henry I of Cyprus for his support of the Ibelan party against the imperialists. The grant was confirmed c. 1269 by Hugh III of Cyprus, with a clause allowing Hugh to buy back the lordship. This was exercised in 1284, when the city was given to his sister Margaret, already the Dowager Lady of Tyre. Conrad of Montferrat. Henry II of Champagne. Amalric of Lusignan, royal domain. Philip of Montfort. John of Montfort. Humphrey of Montfort, returned to the royal domain by purchase. Margaret of Lusignan, widow of John of Montfort. Amalric of Tyre, nephew of Margaret, seigneury of Jocelyn III of Edessa. This seigneury, often called the Seigneurie de Jocelyn, was an unusual creation given to Jocelyn III, the nominal count of Edessa, which had been lost long before. It was created around 1176 when Jocelyn married Agnes of Milly, and was formed from royal land around Acre. Jocelyn had only daughters, who married into the families of Van Henneberg and Manderley. The heirs sold in 1220 the seigneury to the Teutonic Knights, who used the place near Acre as the fortress in Outremer. The archives of the seigneury are the only baronial archives of Outremer to survive.